The disturbing reason some men stay boys forever, Carl Jung explained. There's a moment in every man's life, sometimes loud, and sometimes barely perceptible, when he feels the call to grow up, to step out of the comfortable shadow of youth and confront the unknown frontier of responsibility, of maturity, of manhood. And yet, many never cross that line. They remain physically adult, but spiritually stalled. They chase pleasure, avoid pain, and live in a loop of escapism dressed up as freedom. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist and philosopher, saw this not as a personal failure, but as a deep psychological crisis, a collective pathology of the modern male psyche. And the most disturbing part, society is structured to keep it that way. Let's start with the core of Jung's insight, the shadow. Jung believed that every individual has a part of themselves they repress, deny, or remain unconscious of. This shadow contains everything we refuse to face: our fears, our insecurities, our aggression, our potential. And for the man who never grows up, who never transitions psychologically from boy to man, the shadow is a time bomb. It manifests in projection, addiction, emotional fragility, and the inability to take root in life. He becomes a boy in a man's body, terrified of commitment, allergic to responsibility, and constantly blaming others for his dissatisfaction. And here's the twist: this isn't just a personal issue. It's cultural. And why do some men stay boys forever? Because in many ways we reward it. We idolize youth. We glorify rebellion without direction. We sell fantasies of freedom that are really prisons. Think about how manhood is portrayed in most media, either as a joke, a threat, or a tragedy. Rarely do we see the mature, integrated man who has confronted his darkness and emerged stronger. But instead, we see the eternal adolescent, the man-child who never settles, who avoids depth, who runs from the very things that would make him whole. And here's the disturbing truth: this man is easy to sell to, easy to distract, easy to manipulate.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
You might ask, what does Jung say about this stagnation? He would tell us that the failure to undergo the psychological initiation into adulthood is a failure to individuate. Individuation, in Jungian psychology, is the process of becoming whole, of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the self. And this requires confrontation with your fears, with your father, with death, with meaning. The boy who never becomes a man is the one who refuses that confrontation. He stays in the safe zones of certainty, imitation, and comfort. He never asks, "Who am I behind the mask?" because he's terrified of what he might find. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something truly uncomfortable, not for the sake of success or external reward, but because it was necessary for your inner growth? When did you last sit with your pain, not to escape it, but to understand it? If the answer is "I don't remember," then you might still be in the boy phase no matter your age. And that's not an insult, it's an invitation. Because here's the thing, the boy is not bad. He's necessary. He represents potential, play, curiosity. But if he rules your life, if he's never challenged, he becomes a tyrant. He avoids the suffering that forges meaning. He keeps you chasing novelty instead of building depth. He whispers that safety is better than sovereignty. And unless you consciously begin the journey into the unknown, into the shadow, you remain stuck, endlessly rerunning the same emotional scripts and blaming the world for your inner confusion. Jung believed that every man must, at some point, symbolically kill the boy within, not to erase him, but to transform him, to take all that youthful fire and direct it towards something real, something rooted, something eternal. But you can't fake this. You can't fake maturity. You either earn it through confrontation, or you avoid it and stay lost in the illusion of freedom. And this is where most men falter. Not because they're weak, but because they've never been taught that this journey even exists. And perhaps that's the most disturbing part of all. Society has no real initiation process anymore. No rites of passage, no structured psychological transition from boyhood into manhood. So the boy gets older, but not deeper. He gets taller, but not stronger. He gets louder, but not wiser. And in the absence of initiation, we create distraction, status, money, sex, power. But none of it fills the void where meaning should be. And Jung would say that until you face the unconscious, you will be ruled by it. So the question becomes, are you willing to go into the darkness? Are you willing to confront the parts of yourself you've buried? Because until you do, you may wear the face of a man, but inside, the boy will still be calling the shots. The archetype of the eternal boy, why Peter Pan is actually a tragedy. We all know Peter Pan, the boy who never grows up. To most, he's a symbol of wonder, freedom, and eternal youth. But when Carl Jung looked at this archetype, he didn't see a fairy tale. He saw a warning, a profound psychological pattern hiding in plain sight. What appears charming on the surface, the refusal to age, to commit, to be tied down quickly, becomes tragic when you realize what's actually being avoided: responsibility, but a self-confrontation, and ultimately the fullness of life. Jung called this the Puer Aeternus, Latin for eternal boy. He's not just a character in a story. He's a recurring figure in the collective psyche, and he shows up in modern life more than we think. He's the man who's always chasing the next thrill, the next woman, the next job, the next city, not because he's alive with purpose, but because he's terrified of stillness. Stillness would force him to face himself. And so, he runs. Not on two legs, but on distractions. On ideals. On fantasies. On dreams that never materialize because action would require sacrifice. And sacrifice is the one thing the eternal boy cannot bear. Let's not romanticize this. The Puer Aeternus isn't innocent. He avoids depth in relationships because that would require vulnerability. He avoids long-term commitment because that would mean the death of his many selves. He avoids discipline because it would mean choosing one path and letting the others die. And that's the secret Jung uncovered. The boy doesn't stay a boy because he's happy. He stays a boy because he's afraid of death, not literal death, but psychological death. The death of his infinite potential. The death of the fantasy life. The death of being able to say, I could do anything, and instead saying, I chose this. Now think about how our culture feeds this archetype. We encourage men to stay adaptable, to avoid settling down, to keep options open, to chase the next big thing. And while there's value in exploration, Jung warns us that without integration, exploration becomes addiction. The pure becomes a slave to restlessness. He becomes allergic to real life. He turns depth into danger. And eventually he becomes a stranger to himself. Here's the tragedy. The boy thinks he's free because he avoids limits. But real freedom doesn't come from avoiding limits, it comes from choosing them. From saying, this is my path. This is what I'm willing to suffer for. The man who chooses a purpose, a partner, a principle, he may give up the illusion of endless freedom, but he gains something deeper, meaning. And meaning is what the eternal boy is starving for, even if he doesn't know it. So ask yourself, where are you still running? What part of your life have you kept in fantasy because taking action would require risk? Are there dreams you keep alive just so you don't have to commit to the hard work of making one of them real? And here's the toughest question: is your identity built on becoming someone or avoiding becoming something? Jung believed that maturity isn't about age. It's about integration. The man who integrates the pure the boy within doesn't kill his spirit. He keeps its energy, its wonder, its creativity, but he anchors it in responsibility. He doesn't abandon the dream, he grounds it. He builds a life where the soul can thrive, not escape. And that is rare, because most men either become rigid, bitter adults who've lost the boy completely, or they become grown children, refusing to grow roots. To mature is to mourn the fantasy of who you could have been, and to fully embrace who you are becoming. It means giving up the limitless sky to plant something in the earth, something that lasts, something with weight. And yes, it means choosing, which means losing. But it also means finding. Finding yourself not in the next adventure, but in the man who can walk through fire and still keep his soul intact. So again, we ask, are you living like Peter Pan? Is your freedom real, or is it the fear of becoming something solid? And if you had to choose between infinite options and one meaningful life, what would you choose? The Absent Father and the Rise of the Lost Son, Why Modern Men Lack a Map. Carl Jung often said that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that darkness, for many men today, is not just internal, it's generational. It's the absence of a guiding figure, the missing archetype, the hollow space where a father should have stood. And this absence, this vacuum of masculine initiation, is one of the most disturbing reasons why so many men remain boys well into adulthood. Not because they want to be weak, but because no one ever showed them how to be strong in a way that isn't violent or hollow. Let's go deeper. In Jungian psychology, the father isn't just a biological figure. He's a symbol, a psychic structure. He represents order, discipline, boundaries, and the bridge between instinct and culture. The father figure is the one who introduces the boy to the world of rules, not to crush him, but to shape him. Without that shaping, the boy is never confronted. He's never challenged. He's never given limits that he must wrestle with and eventually transcend. Instead, he drifts, he improvises, he mimics, and ultimately he gets lost. Now ask yourself, how many men today grew up without a strong father? Or with a father who was physically present but emotionally absent? How many were raised in environments where masculinity was either toxic or invisible? If you grew up like that, the world didn't hand you a roadmap. It handed you confusion. And what do you do when you don't know where to go? You freeze. Or worse, you look to the culture to define manhood for you, and the culture is just as lost. So instead of wisdom, you get noise. Be a real man. Get rich. Sleep around. Don't catch feelings. Be grind 24/7. But none of that nourishes the soul. It's all performance. And performance without purpose is just spiritual exhaustion. Jung would say that when the father archetype is missing, the son cannot step into his own authority. He remains in limbo, either rebelling against everything or submitting to anything. Either way, he's not free. And this is why so many men stay boys, because they were never initiated. They were never metaphorically killed by the father in the archetypal sense, meaning never challenged hard enough to break their ego and rebuild it into something stronger. In traditional cultures, initiation rituals were brutal, but they had a purpose: to show the boy that he could survive death, fear, pain, and come out transformed. Today, we have no such rites. We have video games, influencers, and vague self-help slogans. But no fire, no mountain, no elder who looks you in the eye and says, "You are not a child anymore." Jung believed that without initiation, the boy stays psychologically tethered to the mother. He remains in the realm of comfort, emotion, and dependency. The mother archetype nurtures, protects, and embraces, but she cannot initiate. That's the role of the father: to cut, to push, to demand, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Without that tension, the boy never finds his edge. He never discovers what he's capable of. And so, he stays in the safe zone, forever waiting, forever doubting, forever consuming, but never truly creating. This is the rise of the lost son, a generation of men searching for something they were never given. They aren't weak. They aren't broken. They're just uninitiated. They're carrying the weight of a journey that was never mapped out for them. And perhaps the most tragic part is that they blame themselves. They think their confusion is a flaw, when it's actually a symptom of a larger cultural sickness. So let me ask you, who taught you how to be a man? Who challenged you, disciplined you, believed in you enough to push you beyond your limits? If no one comes to mind, then your journey is harder, but not impossible. Because here's the truth: even if you were never initiated, you can choose to initiate yourself. You can become the father you never had. You can build the structure, the discipline, the wisdom you were denied. But only if you stop waiting for someone else to do it. The lost son becomes the true man not by finding the father, but by becoming him. And not through imitation, but transformation. Not by returning to the past, but by forging something new, something rooted in truth, not nostalgia. The death of the fantasy. How real manhood begins when illusion ends. There comes a moment in every man's life, if he's lucky, when the illusion cracks. The fantasy that he can stay safe forever, avoid pain forever, be adored forever, collapses under the weight of life. And it should. Because this death, this breaking of the fantasy, is not the end. It's the beginning. Carl Jung knew that the journey into maturity doesn't start with success. It starts with disillusionment, with mourning, with letting go of the boy's dream that life will somehow work out without sacrifice. This is where real manhood begins. Not in bravado or domination, but in the quiet, solitary moment when you realize no one is coming to save you. The world doesn't owe you comfort. Your dreams won't manifest just because you want them to. The people you love will die. You will fail. You will be misunderstood. And yet, you still must stand. Still must choose. Still must build. Jung called this process individuation, the forging of a self that is not borrowed, not inherited, not manufactured, but earned. And this can only happen after the fantasy dies. The fantasy of perfect love, endless freedom, effortless success. These are the myths that keep boys trapped in men's bodies. And until you bury them, you can't claim the life meant for you. Because maturity isn't about becoming what you imagined, it's about becoming what reality demands. Think about your own life. What illusions are you still holding on to? That the right woman will fix you, that wealth will give you peace, that passion without discipline is enough. These are fantasies, not truths, and clinging to them only delays your real life. The man who waits for ideal conditions never gets started. But the man who accepts reality with its limits, its chaos, its pain discovers something the boy never could: freedom through responsibility. And this is the paradox. The more you reject the fantasy, the more powerful you become. Because now, you're no longer at the mercy of life's storms, you're navigating them. You're no longer seeking approval, you're creating value. You're not floating, you're rooted. And yes, it costs you your illusions, but it gives you back your soul. Jung would say this is the sacred task of every man: to confront the shadow, face the father within, mourn the death of the boy, and step into life with open eyes. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but consciously, willingly. That is what it means to grow up, not to become hard, but to become whole. So I'll leave you with this. What are you still waiting for? Who are you still blaming? What fantasy are you still feeding? And if you knew that the life you were meant to live could only begin the moment you let go of all that, would you do it? Because the disturbing reason some men stay boys forever isn't that they can't grow up, it's that they won't let go. Don't let that be your story. Let the fantasy die and step forward finally as a man.